So hi, everybody. My name is Jenna Nilo. I am the Director of Marketing and Outreach with Illinois Digital Educators Alliance. Thank you so much for joining us today. In a minute, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Leah and Ebony, excuse me, with CodeHS. But before I do so, just a few quick housekeeping items. So if you don't mind, everybody's doing it already, so everybody's getting used to this whole thing. Go ahead, keep yourself muted throughout today's presentation. That will give us the opportunity to just make sure that Leah and Ebony have the floor today and there's no dogs barking in the background or anything like that. Also, if you go ahead and keep your videos off. So we are recording today's session, so this will give Leah and Ebony the opportunity to kind of have that spotlight screen on the video. So in a minute, I'm going to mute myself and do the same thing on my end. So please help us out with that. We do, however, welcome interaction throughout today's presentation. So Leah's going to go over some ideas that they have for interaction, but you also are welcome to utilize that chat window throughout the presentation. And Ebony and myself will be monitoring that, primarily Ebony, but we're going to be monitoring that and making sure that all of your guys' questions get answered today. So please go ahead and definitely use those interaction opportunities as much as you can. Let's see. We, as I said, we are recording. Tomorrow morning, I will be sending out an email to everybody who registered with the copy of the recording or the link to the recording, the copy of today's presentation, and a copy of the chat file. So I'll make sure that everything that's linked in the chat file or that needs to be linked is linked, and then I'll send you the PDF of that. So keep an eye out for that email coming from me tomorrow morning. And then last but not least, if you are looking for professional development credit or PDHs for Illinois educators, even if you're not an Illinois educator, we're so happy you're here. And if you're looking for just evidence of completion, at the end of today's session, I'm going to be putting a link in the chat window, and I'll let you know when I'm doing it. But I'm going to put a link in the chat window for you to go ahead and click the link, and there's a little bit of Google form back and forth in order for you to get that. So you'll just fill that out at the end of the session and you'll be good to go. So I think that's it. Without further ado, I am going to turn things over to Leah, who is sharing her screen. I'm going to mute myself, turn myself off, and again, use that chat window. Leah and Ebony, thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited about this new partnership with CodeHS. I just talked their ear off about how excited I am about it, so I'm not going to do that to you guys. But so excited and glad to have you on board and here with us today. So I'm going to zip my lips and turn things over to you. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jenna, and welcome all Illinois teachers to the CodeHS Hour of Code presentation. Both Ebony and I are in Illinois. We'll do some introductions in just a second, but so we're homegrown Illinois people, and we're very excited to be part of this IDEA partnership, also this IDEA webinar. And back in the day, I was part of IDEA in terms of when it was called ICE. So I've seen the growth of this organization and community, and it's been really exciting. So it's very cool to be with you guys today. All right, so to kick off our webinar, we first have a start here document, and Ebony will toss this into the chat area for you in just a second. But basically, this contains all the major links that we'll be using. It'll have the slide deck, it'll have how to sign up for a CodeHS account, and all the different resources and things that we're using. So it's kind of a one-stop document for you to access everything that we'll be using today. All right, just some introductions. My name is Leah Sloan. I am the Director of Professional Development here at CodeHS. I did teach computer science for, let's see, well, I taught for 14 years in Plainfield. And in that time period, 8 of those years, I taught computer science, everything from intro to computer science all the way through APCSA. At the same time, it was always something I was really interested in, and I would have loved at the time if there had been this thing, Hour of Code, but I left the classroom in 2011. Hour of Code came around in 2013 because I also taught some other subjects. I taught math, social studies, science, and it would have been really cool to be able to introduce some CS topics in a small, lightweight kind of way, like an Hour of Code, to get kids excited about taking computer science courses. I have been at CodeHS for a couple of years. I was a curriculum developer for a while, and then we started a new professional development team this year, and I became the director of that at the beginning of the year. I have with me Ebony Davis. She is our customer experience specialist, and I'll let her do a quick intro, and then she'll be mostly monitoring the chat for us during this webinar.
Hi everyone, my name's Ebony. I was a preschool teacher here in Chicago. I'm actually very new to the computer science world. Like I said, I taught preschool, and I wasn't aware of a lot of the opportunities for younger students to get involved with computer science. And I am learning and hoping to grow those here. I just shared the link for the starting document in the chat. Nice to meet everyone.
Thanks, Ebony, and thanks for helping out today. All right, so I think you're all pretty familiar with Zoom, but I just wanted to let you know about some of the features. Jenna already talked about starting and stopping your video, unmuting and muting. And we have a fairly small group here. So there are different points where I might have you unmute and just say something. That might be the easiest way. You can also just throw things into the chat. I'm monitoring that. Ebony's monitoring that as well, but I'll try to peek at it. If there are questions I can answer in real time, I will definitely do that. We also have a parking lot document. We have found over time that sometimes when we run webinars, it's easy for things to get lost in that chat area, and we don't want to lose any of your questions. So we have a parking lot document that's just basically a shared Google Doc where you can put questions in there as well. This is also a good opportunity for things that might be a little bit off topic. So maybe there are things you want to know about CodeHS or coding in general that aren't Hour of Code specific, and that is totally fine. You can put questions on the parking lot document as well. Any questions so far? Awesome. All right, well, let's go ahead and dive in. So you can get a CodeHS account at codehs.com/signup/teacher. You do not need to have it to run any of our Hour of Codes, and I'll explain that in a little bit. But if you do want to, for some reason, track your students' progress on the Hour of Code when you're delivering it, whether it's in a computer science class or a different class altogether or whatever, you will have to have a section and account made so you can track their progress. But you do not have to do that. Kids and you as well, you can complete Hour of Codes without being logged in or anything like that. But I did want to give you that opportunity if that's something you wanted to think about. All right, so we did do introductions. The only thing I would like you to kind of toss in here too, because this will inform my presentation a little bit later, is your current teaching setup. So are you completely virtual right now? Are you doing something that's blended, something that's hybrid, or are you completely in person? I don't think there are too many of those in-person scenarios, but I'm just curious to know what your current teaching setups are. And if you could toss that into the chat, that would be awesome. And I do know that this is like the end of the school day and you may have stuff going on in your background with dogs, kids, spouses, stuff like that. So if you can't type in the chat for every single thing, not a big deal. So purely remote, virtual. Okay, which is what I was kind of thinking based on what I know of teachers and what's going on with Illinois. So there are some hybrid setups. Okay. All right. That's really helpful. Okay, so I will try to speak to these different scenarios. So when you think about how you're going to deliver an Hour of Code, I'll give some tips and tricks for that too. With that said, if you have run an Hour of Code before, either with CodeHS or any other platform, totally fine. While I'm going through things, if there's an idea that you want to build on, like hey, I do that too, what Leah just said, or I do something like that only slightly differently or whatever, I'm totally fine with you tossing that into the chat area too. I feel like, obviously I don't have all the answers and you have done different things on the ground as well. So if you have an idea or something you've done that's been successful, please feel free to throw that into the chat area as well. All right, so let's dive in. So here's our agenda for the half an hour, 45 minutes that we have with you. We're going to first talk about what Hour of Code is, in case you don't know. And then we're going to go through the CodeHS Hour of Code tutorials at a very high level. I'm going to talk to you about how to select one that might be appropriate for age level or what you're planning on doing or what you're able to do. I'm going to give you a little bit of play time where you're going to have a few minutes where you can dive into your own hour of code that you can just play with, test it, see if it's something you'd want to do with your kids. And then we'll talk about how to run an hour of code. All right, so what is this thing called Hour of Code? Well, it's part of Computer Science Education Week. And the goal of Hour of Code is to expose more K-12 students to computer science with an Hour of Code tutorials. So the real ultimate goal is to increase access and equity. So students can be sitting in other classes that they're taking, whether it's middle school, high school, elementary school, whatever, and they might not even be aware of this thing called computer science or coding or what can happen in those classes. So this gives an opportunity for teachers or even other roles at different schools, like if you're a media center director or an instructional technologist or something like that, to just expose students to computer science and coding in a really pretty lightweight way. It can also help them get excited about taking certain classes at your school. So if you have computer science classes and kids are wondering whether or not they should take a class, this can give them some exposure to that. You can also do Hour of Code in your computer science class. So if you're currently teaching a CS course, maybe you're teaching AP-CSA, and you go, you know, I want something just lightweight and fun around the holidays. I want to do a music Hour of Code. And you've got time in your schedule, you could break free of the regular curriculum for a little bit of time and run just something completely different than what's in your course. So CSEdWeek is held in December, and it's in recognition of Grace Hopper. She was a big computer scientist back in the early part of the last century, and her birthday is December 9th, so it's always the week that falls around her birthday. So this week, it's December 7th through the 13th. All right, so part of Computer Science Ed Week and Hour of Code is to really increase access and equity. I talked about that, but one thing that you can bring into the Hour of Codes that's outside of the actual tutorial is exposing students to computer scientists who look like them or people that they can relate to. So women and people of color and things like that. So I have provided some examples here to get you thinking, but it's another way for students to be able to see themselves in a possible coding role or computer science role. So Hour of Code is a nationwide initiative, and this was started back in 2013 by Code.org. Code.org, the company, started in 2012, and the next year they introduced Hour of Code to millions of students. CodeHS is a company that also creates computer science materials, mostly for 6th through 12th grade students. But we also create Hour of Code tutorials. We have lots of them that I'm going to show you in a little bit that you can access and use with your students. So the goals are to have fun. For the kids to have fun, for you to have fun, to pick something that you think you all can get excited about in class. To get students excited about computer science and maybe considering taking other computer science courses if they're available, and encourage students to sign up for some of these CS courses. So how can Hour of Code help your students? It gives them a fun, quick way, low pressure way of getting into some coding. It can get them excited about learning more, whether they take a class or not, or just learn things online, totally fine. They can explore online resources. They can see using computer science strategies, the thinking, that computational thinking, and tools in other areas. And then they also might start to see that computer science can really be for anyone. It's not just about, super smart students and kids that, that only want to take computer science, that they might have some opportunities in careers that maybe aren't computer science focused, but have a CS element to them. All right. Any questions about what Hour of Code is, how it got started, the goals, that kind of stuff before we jump into our Hour of Code tutorials? All right. Let's take a look at ours. So we have a link here for you, and this is where we house all of our Hour of Codes. And I'm going to Ebony will toss that into the chat. I'm just going to show you what it looks like. You can filter by the new hour of codes, and we have a few more that are being released in the next week or so, I think 3 or 4 new ones. Middle school ones, Spanish, offline activities, ones that relate to apps, and also interdisciplinary. So I'm going to walk you through kind of an overview of what each of these entails, and then we'll have a little bit of time where you can dive into those. All right, so sometimes you might be thinking, well, how do I pick the right hour of code tutorial? So we've created a chart that has all of our current hour of code tutorials on here. Might be a little bit hard to see on the screen, but we'll share out the slides, or you can peek at them in the slides as you're following along with me. We have everywhere from grades 6 through 8 with no coding experience required, all the way up through grades 11 and 12, where you might want to have kids have had some coding experience in their backgrounds. So you can see a lot of the different samples that are here. We'll talk about most of these at a pretty high level. All right, so an awesome place to start with Hour of Code, if you've never done one before and you've never had your kids do one, is our beginner ones with coding and music, coding in art, or generating art with code, and coding in sports. These 3 are very, there's a lot of really cool output that they get to make to create with it. So the coding and music one, they get to create beats. The generating art with code, I think they're using, and that one they're creating memes for the first one. And then they have coding in sports, where they get the basics of some game design. So this is a nice jumping off point because they're pretty lightweight, they're pretty easy to deliver, and they also are available in blocks. So if you feel like you or your kids aren't quite ready for full-on coding, but you want them to get into some coding, you can do blocks for all of these Hour of Code explorations. We have others that are for beginners as well. Programming with Carol the dog. Carol is a little dog that lives in a grid world. She's super cute. You can make her do lots of things, pick up balls, jump hurdles, all kinds of fun stuff. But we have a beginning activity for that can get students introduced to coding. Web design is also a nice entry point because it's HTML and CSS, and that's pretty lightweight. They can work with pictures and images and create static web pages. We also have a digital art in pixels, so they can learn how images are stored with pixels on a computer. We do have a Spanish version of Carol the dog as well, so that Hour of Code is fully in Spanish. And then another really nice jumping off point is Tracy the turtle in Python, so they can do turtle graphics. All of these can also be done with block coding. Let me think about that for 1 sec, except maybe the digital art one, but that one isn't too heavy duty. But they can toggle between blocks and text depending on how you want them to approach that Hour of Code. All right, here's some other beginning ones as well. They can, for high school students, they can do coding in Python. So this is a level up from the Tracy one, but they can do some really cool graphical images with Python and have Tracy do lots of fun things. There's also a cryptocurrency where they can explore the Bitcoin ledger. This one doesn't have as much coding in it, but it is very computer science intense, and it might be one that you could send maybe certain students off on if they're curious to learn about cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, and those kinds of things. All right, some intermediate level Hour of Codes that we have is using React Native to create mobile apps. So this gives students an opportunity to create their very first mobile app using React Native, and they can get a sense of how to make apps in general. What age is the beginning level? That's a great question. So our materials currently go down to 6th grade, though we do have some 5th grade classes that will use our Hour of Codes. Good question. But beginning could also be beginning, it's new to them. So maybe at the high school level, if students have never experienced any kind of coding at all, Carol the dog still might be a really good entry point for them. We also have a virtual reality Hour of Code, so the students can learn how basic VR works. They use HTML and A-frame and a little bit of JavaScripting so they can create some virtual worlds. We also have JavaScript graphics art, so they can make their own graphics and drawings using JavaScript. And we also have a creating apps with JavaScript. So this is similar to the React Native one, except they're going to be using JavaScript to create their apps. And then coding in Java with CodeHS. So this is gets them into coding a little bit with the Java programming language, just with some basic things to see if they like that particular language. As far as K4, that's a good question, and Ebony might be able to speak to this a little bit, but I think, you know, some of the earlier ones like Carol, if you do those in blocks, and Tracy, if you do that in blocks as well, those might work for 4th grade, but below that, I would say it'd probably be pretty tough. Ebony, would you say that that's probably pretty accurate?
Yeah, that's accurate. And in my class, we did a group, so we all did it together where I was leading it, but for students doing it on their own, I think it's best for 4th and above.
Thank you. And that brings up a really good point. So depending on how you're delivering things virtually, and depending on the time that you have, that is one strategy you can use, is just doing an hour of code together with the whole class. So it's a way that you can remove, maybe scaffold it a little bit, and remove some of the barriers by actually helping the kids along through some of the hour codes too. All right, so we also have some interdisciplinary ones, mostly math and science. So we have coding mathematical models. We have another cryptocurrency hour of code. This is exploring the blockchain technology. So this would be kind of a level up from the first one on just basic cryptocurrency. We have a Punnett square generator. So if you're teaching biology, this might be a fun one to bring in. And we also have calculating triangles. And so this allows students to calculate the area of a triangle with dimensions that they input, and then coding collision simulation. So they're looking at some physics things, and this is like elastic collisions with mass and speed and all that good stuff. So this is definitely a level up from some of the beginning ones, but it's a nice way in math and science at the high school level to pull in some computer science. We also have some unplugged activities. So these are completely off the computer. They're with handouts and they're pretty cool. One is creating a Caesar cipher wheel. And I could see younger students doing this one and having a lot of fun with it, because they can make a Caesar cipher and send encoded messages to each other just on paper. And we have handouts and everything that go with that. But I think that's definitely something that they could handle and would have fun with. We also have an unplugged coding with Carol the dog. So this is another handout activity that could work well with younger students. And then unplugged color by pixel. So that goes with that pixel activity that I was talking about that's online. So if you do happen to have your students in a hybrid setting or a blended setting where you are getting them face-to-face, but you want to get them away from devices because they're doing a lot remotely, this might be an opportunity to have them just do something that encourages computational thinking, but is not using a computer. All right. Are there any questions about the ones that I've gone over? And like I said, we do have a few that are going to be coming out in the next week or so that will be added to this list, but I think I covered all of those. I'm going to give you a few minutes to actually dive into one in just a second, but any initial questions? Okay. All right. So when you see this page here that has all of our hour of codes on it, you can literally start an hour of code for yourself, and you don't have to be logged in to do this, and start working through an hour of code. If you have a CodeHS account, you'll see an assign button, and you can actually assign a particular hour of code to your students in a section you have with CodeHS. And maybe I should get a quick pulse on that. Does anyone currently use CodeHS to teach computer science or anything else? So if you can put that in the chat, that would be great. Oh yeah, Stephen. Okay, awesome. Okay. Anybody else? Okay, for Stephen and anybody else, if you want to assign a particular one to your kids in a section, you can absolutely just use that assign button and assign that to them. I'm going to give everybody about 5 minutes to find an hour of code that you think either you might want to do by yourself just to test it out for your kids, or one that you might think your kids could be interested in, and start on that. So go to this URL, codehs.com/hour of code. We'll toss that into the chat too. I'll just grab that while I'm sitting there. And start one of these on your own. Make sure you keep yourselves muted, because some of them do, when you listen to the videos or you start doing the coding with beats, it gets a little noisy. I'm going to give you a few minutes just to sample some out, and then we'll share out in the chat area how that experience went. I just realized there was one I forgot to add to my list. Pi Day, that's a new one this year, came out this spring. So for the math teachers, that could be fun. Okay, give you about another minute or so. And then if there's anything you want to put into the chat, like if you can toss in which one you tried. I know you obviously didn't get to work through the whole thing, but just get a kind of a lay of the land. If you have any thoughts or ideas about how you might use one or which one you might use, go ahead and toss that into the chat when you're ready. So Stephen mentioned the Bitcoin blockchain series. Those are pretty cool to kind of look under the hood of how Bitcoin works. There's not really coding involved in it, but it does get the kids thinking about what's happening behind the scenes. There's a little bit, but it's not as coding intensive as some of the other tutorials. But if you've got students who are interested in that, if you're interested in it too, it can be a fun thing to dive into and learn about. Anyone else that you see one that you think you might like to try on your own or with your students? Yeah, Donna, all the links we'll share out. So we can toss in the Start Here document. So Karen mentioned using triangles and geometry. Very cool. That one I think is in JavaScript, so it's pretty straightforward. Anybody else want to share? All right, and if you started one, we'll just peek at this one. The kind of the flagship Hour of Code is Programming with Carol. He's our little dog. Whoops. Get that going. I think Zoom is having a fight with everything else I've got open, so I'll hold off on that. Let's go back to the slides. All right, so let's talk now about how you can run an hour of code, either in person or virtually. And here's where I want you to chime in. If you come up with ideas of ways to do this virtually, definitely add to the list. So one thing you want to do for sure is go through the lesson plan that's provided with Hour of Code. And it's usually like a page or 2 pages. And I'm going to walk through one in detail, what that looks like and what's on a typical lesson plan for an hour of code and the kinds of things you can expect in terms of help. So each of the guides that we have or lesson plans have what you to do before the hour of code, during the hour of code, and then some hour of code tips. So the sample one we're going to look at is the coding and music. This is probably one of our most popular hour of codes. In this hour of code, students are introduced to the JavaScript block coding environment, and they learn how to write a program that plays their own 8-count beat pattern. It also comes with some handouts if you want to use those. So there's a student handout and then also a teacher version that has the answer key. So if there's questions that you're not sure how to answer, that's already provided for you. It also has an objective. So really what we want the students to be able to accomplish during their 1 hour of code. They want them in this one to be able to use JavaScript block coding to create their own beats with the music visualization by creating an array of beats. And they play sounds through the use of different parameters. So they're introducing a lot of computer science topics here, but in a fun way, and it's clearly spelled out in the tutorial videos and all of that. So they get to make this cool visualization that shows they can change the colors and they can change the beats and all those kinds of things. And there's the link to that hour of code music activity. So that's also in the teacher guide. The guide also contains discussion questions. So you have questions around what's happening with the hour of code. So some general kinds of computer science questions like what is programming? How do you think computers are used in music generation and production? What was the hardest part of the activity? What was the easiest? Just to get them thinking and reflecting about what they did during the hour of code. And you want to encourage them to get creative with their programs and for them to start to realize that there's no correct program. So there's no one right or wrong answer, and they should feel free to experiment until they have something that they feel like they're proud of. So before the hour of code, you definitely want to complete it on your own ahead of time, just so you know what the glitches are and if there's anything that you know specifically your students might need to be forewarned about or supports that you might want to build in. Definitely want to go through the lesson plan. Some tutorials have handouts, so if you're in person, you can make copies. If you're doing it virtually, you can share them via Google Drive or Google Classroom, whatever you're working through. Students can work logged out, but just recall, like I said at the beginning, if you do want to be able to save their progress, they'll need to be signed in. So some of the tutorials, a lot of them only have 1 or 2 exercises and they're kind of one and done and you can move on to something else. But if you feel like you want them to be able to go back to what they did on a particular exercise, then you might want to make a quick account, make a section, and then throw the hour code into that so they can hang on to their progress. So in terms of delivering an hour of code, you can project just one slide that directs the students to complete the tutorial. That's one way to do it. It can be very independently done, and you can have them just run with it on their own. You can also watch the video or videos. Some hour code tutorials have more than one video. You can watch them together as a class, or you can allow the kids to watch them independently. You can also have students work together. So if you want to encourage some more collaboration, or if you feel like you just want an easier entry point and just have the kids doing some things together, you can absolutely have them collaborate and work on a coding exercise together. With this said, as teachers, we know we probably want to decide ahead of time if you want them to be accountable for something in it. And maybe you're just doing it for fun. That's the intent of Hour of Code, but sometimes I know you've got 30 kids in a class and there you have 2 or 3 that might not be following along with you, and you want to incentivize it a little bit. If you need to have some level of accountability in there, absolutely do that. That's kind of up to you. You know your kids, so do what makes sense. Just looking at some, oh, okay, perfect. Thank you, Ebony. And then they can also share out their program. So we have a share button that you'll see in the code editor that will allow kids to share out with anybody what they created, so people can actually see the output and see it running and see what they actually did for their hour code. We also have, like I said, discussion questions, and some of these are specific to that certain hour of code and some of them are more general. So you can get kids thinking about what kinds of fields or careers that they're interested in and how coding could be used in those fields. So we give an example here. If they're interested in the medical field, how could coding possibly be used in the medical field? So that's just one idea. What kind of jobs and careers can you use programming in? What are some products that you use that were built at least in part by code? They should be able to come up with a ton of these. Do you think it's important to know how to program? Why? What are some advantages that you might have if you know how to code? And what are some problems that we may face today that could be solved with coding? So these are some really big questions, and you don't have to use all of them, but they might be good discussion starters for you and for your students. So there's some things that we're going to give some tips and tricks that you can do and help in terms of helping students when they're stuck, and then potential issues that you could run into when you're running an hour code. But I want to pause there for a second just to check in and see if we have any questions so far on running one. And let me peek at the parking lot. I don't know if there's anything I need to answer there. Nope, not yet. Anything I can answer before we go into some other tips? Okay, so helping kids get stuck. So, I mean, they're fun, they're lightweight, they're hours of code, but still sometimes students may get stuck on parts because they're learning something new. Just remember, you don't need to have all the answers. This was one of the things that really got me excited when I switched from teaching math to teaching computer science. In math, I felt like I always had to know the answers, and it was sometimes a little bit nerve-wracking teaching some higher level mathematics. When you get into computer science, a lot of things are changing. There are a lot of things that become new, things change in the language. So I had to, over time, let go of this notion that I needed to have all the answers and that was okay if I didn't. And sometimes the kids would be, some of the kids in the class would come up with something and I'd go, oh, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Let's try it. I'll try it. Would have other people in the class try it too. So Jenna mentions learning alongside your students is so exciting. I would say that, yeah, that's exactly spot on. I think that's what keeps it interesting, especially if you're teaching sometimes the same thing year after year. If there's certain new things you can inject or experience, that's really cool. So you can ask questions to activate their problem solving. So ask them, what do you want the program to do? So we task them with something specific in the hour of code, but maybe they need to reframe it in a different way and think about what is it they're trying to actually get the code to do. What are you telling the program to do? So this is where students start to recognize what I'm actually saying in the code gets the computer, the compiler on the back end and the browser to actually run something and do something for me. So am I telling it to do the right things, basically? The next question is a huge one. And if you've taught even a little bit of computer science, One of the things that you learn how to do is how to break problems into smaller steps. This is called decomposition. And if you can encourage the students during the hour of code, if there's something they need to break down, this is a great way to get them thinking. And then what can you try differently? So I've tried it this way. How can I shake it up and do something different if I'm stuck? In our code editor as well, there is a docs tab that has documentation for whatever language that hour of code is in. So whether it's Java, JavaScript, Python, whatever, Carol, there's a docs tab in there. They can also go back to the slides. And they can also rewatch the video if they need to. So let's look at some common issues that happen either in person or virtually. There aren't enough devices. So you have an in-person setting, maybe I know a couple people were teaching in a hybrid setup. One thing that you can do if you don't have enough devices is have students pair program. So in this scenario, and this is just a brief overview of pair programming, one student, the driver, types in the code, and then the navigator reviews the code and guides the driver. And then at about the 10-20 minute mark, you can have them switch roles and have the other person do that as well. It's a great way to get them thinking about the problem in different ways, but also leverages your devices if you don't have enough to go around for everybody. If you're also in person and kids don't have headphones, so if you're not watching it as a class where it doesn't matter if they have headphones, but everybody's watching them individually, watching the videos, so this is only an issue if you're in class. You can bring an extra set of headphones or just have a few extra ones on hand. Tell the kids the day before or whatever you're going to be doing hour of code, bring your earbuds so they can listen to the videos on their own. If you're in person as well and you've got slow internet, videos are not loading for the kids for some reason, you can hook your computer up to a projector, watch the video together. We have teachers that do all kinds of different scenarios in terms of watching the video or going through the slides. So whatever makes sense in your setup. You can also go through the examples and the exercises that are in the hour of code with them if you want to do that. Like Ebony talked about, just doing the hour of code with the students. That worked totally fine too. All right, so doesn't happen often, but if for some strange reason the CodeHS site crashes, doesn't happen. We do have a static website that has 4 of our hour of codes currently on it. So you can run it. It basically runs locally. You don't need to have access to our actual site. So this will continue to work if the site crashes. Hasn't happened. I don't think it ever happened in our code that I can remember that we've run, but we always provide this because we want to make sure we're fully supporting our teachers and students as much as we can. It has the Carol the dog one, coding with graphics and JavaScript, and then the 2 unplugged activities, the Pixel one and Carol the dog. So internet cuts out, you're in person, you can run an unplugged hour of code. We have 3 or 4 of those. But remember, you do need handouts for those if you're going to be doing unplugged ones. You want to save progress as part of your course section. I already mentioned this, but it's worth mentioning again. You just need to make sure you have a CodeHS account and then assign it to a particular section that you want to add it to. But the default, really, what most teachers do the first time they're trying hour of code is just they have the students completed logged out. They don't do them logged in. So don't feel like you need to do that. All right. Any questions about how you can run an hour of code? Or are there any ideas from people who have run one that would like to chime in at this point? All right. Well, I did want to share some additional resources we have in general. Start now. Oh, Stephen, are you talking about in terms of planning, getting ready for hour of code? Yes, 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 he's spot on. So yeah, December, whatever, 9th through the 13th or whatever it is this year, it comes up very quickly. So if you do want to make sure that you're ready, start now, and don't hesitate to reach out to me or anybody on our team. We can help walk you through certain things if you're not sure which one to pick or what you want to do and whatnot. So we do have some basic resources here for getting started with CodeHS if you want to just use it, if you're going to use it to teach computer science, if you want to sign up for some courses yourself. All of our curriculum is totally free. The stuff that we charge for are the teacher tools, but we have a lot of teachers that completely teach on free. And anything in the curriculum you can use with your students, or you can learn on yourself too. So there's some just different articles that we have listed here. We do have a virtual learning guide that probably spoke to a lot of the tips I gave about Hour of Code, but it speaks to virtual teaching in general. It's a great resource, so you might want to take a peek at that one. We have free PD workshops that are coming up through CodeHS that in November that are more computer science focused, but if you're teaching computer science, you can definitely sign up for those, totally free, and they're run by our teacher trainers. So these are teachers who are using CodeHS in the classroom currently. We have upcoming webinars. We're always running our own webinars as well. We have a Facebook group, very active Facebook group with computer science teachers, asking questions, sharing lots and lots of ideas, really, really active group. And let's see if there's anything else. The other stuff you can take a peek at. All right, we have just a quick survey for you because we want to get a pulse on what you thought of this webinar. We're going to be running some other events for IDEA as well, but before I talk about that, are there any questions or anybody thinking what they're going to do for Hour of Code? Like, do you know which day you want to run one, or which one you might like to try to run? And it might be one that's not ours, and that's fine. We know teachers cobble together lots of different resources, we understand. Well, we definitely hope you can run one. We know time is really, you're crunched this year. I mean, we were always crunched as teachers for time. This year is even weirder because you're in such a different setup that you probably feel like you're not getting through the curriculum as it is. But even if you have students do something outside of class, maybe they just need an extra enrichment, or you just want them to do something that's computer science related, or together, or even for 15 minutes just to expose them to a little bit of computer science, it would be great. I don't know if you've looked at some of the statistics for Illinois. We have a tremendous number of computer science jobs, and we are not filling them in Illinois. We're filling them from other places, or we're not filling them at all. So it would be great if we could have our kids, Illinois kids, actually be able to do computer science in Illinois and support our businesses and industries with CS. Oh, an intro to business. Okay, Donna. And oh, the mobile apps later. Cool. Okay. Very nice. Anybody else? Any thoughts on using Hour of Code, or any questions? All right, we do have a couple more events we're running for IDEA in the next couple of weeks. They're both on Saturdays. One is one on digital citizenship. It's gonna be a lot of fun. Saturday morning from 9 to 10:30. Wait, is it this Saturday? Yes, boy, time is flying quickly. It's this Saturday. And I'm sure that Jenna will share out information about that if you've not signed up for it already. And then we've got one a couple weeks after that that is on cybersecurity. It's on our cybersecurity course. So it goes beyond the digital citizenship and cyber hygiene, and we look into things like networking and software security and stuff like that, and what those courses look like. But we would be super thrilled if you could fill out our survey just to give us feedback on the information we shared today, and then other things you might be interested in down the road with us as well. I am very thankful that you all joined us, and I hope you are starting to think about what you might do for Hour of Code with your students.
Awesome. Thank you, Leah. Thank you, Ebony. That was fantastic. So I have to tell everybody I was going to pipe in, but then I decided to keep my mouth shut until this point. So when I was a computer science teacher, I told these guys the story before you all joined us today. So when I was a computer science teacher in the classroom, obviously I taught a K-8 classroom, and then I moved to high school. But legit, Hour of Code week was my absolute favorite time of the year. And I turned it from an hour of code into the entire month of December. So we would come back from Thanksgiving break, and right before we left for break, the last day of school before Thanksgiving, I would decorate my entire classroom. I was in a computer lab. I would decorate the entire classroom for Christmas so that when the kids came back into my classroom that first week, which I saw everybody 1 to 2 times a week, so, you know, whatever day that week they came in, I would have Andy Williams, It's the Most Wonderful Time of the Year, playing on my, in my room. And I would get the kids all jazzed up for coding. For, you know, the first year we did it for, I don't know, maybe the hour. We tried it out in each of the classes, and I realized what a gem that this was, that the next year I made it the entire month until we left for Christmas break. So every week we had different activities. The kids would build on activities. There's so many things in Hour of Code. We did CodeHS activities. We did other activities, but it is just such a phenomenal time. And it was my favorite time of the year because you could hear a pin drop in my classroom and the kids would leave so engaged that their brains actually hurt because they were thinking so much. You know, the younger classes that we did the pair programming, they were cheering and, you know, not a pin drop, obviously, because they were working together. They were cheering everything. The older kids would have their headphones on and they'd be doing their things, but we also had swivel chairs in our classroom. And the kids, like, you'd be literally sitting there and you'd see the kids going like this, trying to get, you know, the carol through the maze, or, you know, to get the tennis ball or whatever. So you'd see their body like trying to decide which way to go. And so just the engagement and the thinking that was going on was just so incredible. It truly, truly is the most wonderful time of the year. So excited. I am going to go ahead and share my screen. I'm going to steal yours. And as Leah said, we have some other workshops coming up with CodeHS. The first one is this Saturday. Are you seeing my chat window? I just got rid of that. These are some 2 free workshops that CodeHS is sponsoring. So if you go, I'll be putting in the chat window in a second the link to everything. So if you go and register for this one on Saturday, it's a free registration, 9 to 10:30, and as Leah said, cybersecurity basics, digital citizenship, and cyber hygiene. So that one is this Saturday. And then we actually have, in between the 2 CodeHS workshops, we have another, the 4-letter word code workshop coming up on November 9th. So that one is 3:30 to 5 p.m., not CodeHS specific, so a different one. So you can find out more about that one on our website as well. Obviously, we're getting ready for Hour of Code week in December. So November is everybody's get ready for Hour of Code. So lots of coding things going on. So that one's November 9th, 3:30 to 5. And then our next one with CodeHS that CodeHS is sponsoring is November 21st, again, 9 to 10:30. I believe that's another Saturday one, looking under the hood at cyber courses for 6 to 12 students. So 6th grade through 12th grade, you guys get it. So there's another one. And again, you can register for that on our website. I'll be putting that link in a second. And then last but not least, because we're coming up to the end of November, it's the beginning of November and I just said the end of November, but you know, hey, it's coming. And so at the end of November, November 21st, right before Thanksgiving, we are ending our early bird pricing for our IdeaCon. So if you haven't heard, we've gone all virtual with IdeaCon this year. And we are running our early bird pricing through November 21st. So we've teamed up with TCEA out of Texas to offer you guys an entire month long of learning. So many awesome opportunities, so many ways to grow your PLN, to get professional development credit, all those great things. So definitely go ahead and check that out. And again, early bird pricing ends November 21st. So get in now while the getting's good. So let me go ahead and I'm going to grab my sticky here with all my information. As my dog starts barking, because this is the way things happen. In the chat,